My hypothesis at this point is that your competitors want this more than you do. If you don't want this, then don't do it.
Hello and welcome to episode 465 of the Thinking LSAT podcast. I'm Ben Olson and with me is Nathan Fox. We're the co-founders of LSATdemon.com and the LSAT Demon Daily podcast. Be LSAT famous, share news and ask questions on our website, thinkinglsat.com. Just around the corner, next week we have the August 2024 LSAT. A week after that, on Tuesday, August 13th, we have a free logical reasoning class with Kevin. The class is called Guilty or Not Guilty LR. I've never been to his class, but I am guessing that Kevin is looking at the arguments in logical reasoning and deciding whether they're valid or invalid, good or bad, guilty or not guilty.
That's it in a nutshell. Yeah, it's really the key to our approach to logical reasoning is just to attack the arguments. I mean, if there's an argument there, it's guilty 90% of the time. It's guilty of being an incomplete argument, an imperfect argument, sometimes outright flawed argument. So it's critical that you're able to read, those pretty short passages really on logical reasoning. It's 2, 3, 4 sentences maybe, and figure out, is there a conclusion here? Is that conclusion justified by the facts or not? And that's what guilty or not guilty is about.
I love that they focus on the core skill. I mean, that's really where everything comes down to. They can sign up at lsatdemon.com/free. Again, that's lsatdemon.com/free. Cool. Quick shout out for listeners with LSAT fee waivers. You can get LSAT Demon Basic for $38 a month. It's normally $95, so that's a 60% discount. Or you can get 20% off premium or live. You can find out more at lsatdemon.com/plans.
I might add that some people have been approved for the LSAC fee waiver who never thought they would have been approved. Other people get approved. Other people apply, get denied, and then appeal and get like insta approved on their appeal. So it's worth applying for and potentially appealing the LSAC fee waiver decision, not just because of the discounts that you get from us, but you get credential assembly service for free. You get a couple cracks at the LSAT for free. You get Law Hub for free. You get lots of stuff for free, including pretty much every law school will just automatically give you an application fee waiver. So it's worth like a couple grand if you get that LSAC fee waiver. And that's before you start talking about the robust discounts that you get from us. But we do have what we think is the best LSAC fee waiver plan out there for students. Discount plan, and we hope that students will know about that and apply if they qualify.
Certainly, yeah.
Next one is from Daniel, who submitted an audio question. We're going to listen to that right now.
Hi, LSAT Demon team. My question is simple, and it's about score variance. Why does it happen, and how can I minimize it? I'm curious about this because I recently scored both a 172 and a 180 in the same exact week. My section scores are consistently between -0 and -2 for both logical reasoning and reading comprehension. I would just like to know how I can get them to be -0 every single time. So if there's anything that you guys could say about that, I'd really appreciate it, and thanks for everything else that you guys do.
Thanks, Daniel. I think it's a pretty easy question to answer, actually.
Okay, go for it.
Well, Daniel says I'm -0 to -2 on my sections. Well, yeah, okay. So if you get -0, -0, -0, then you score 180. And if you get -2, -2, -2, then you score 172. Fairly simple, right? I mean, it's not like that's a surprising 172 to 180 is not a big variance. That's not an unusually wide margin. Right now, Daniel, your average performance is -1 per section, -3 per test, 176. But sometimes you catch the bad side of variance and you get the 172. Sometimes you catch the good side of variance and you get the 180. And it doesn't have to mean anything at all. Where does the variance come from? The variance comes from the fact that you're not perfect on the test. You're pretty damn good at the test, and sometimes you do score -0. But for every question you miss, there's probably another one that you got right from random guessing. And so, like your real ability right now is -1, plus or -1. And so there's some stuff that you don't quite understand. So you should dig in deeply to the questions that you're actually missing, the mistakes that you're making, and figure out why you're making those mistakes. That's the only road to get to -0. But you're mistaken if you think that variance is your problem. Variance isn't your problem. Variance is your friend. Law schools only care about your highest score. So you would much rather score 180, 172, 180, 172 than score 176, 176, 176, 176. Because if you have that variance, then you're going to catch the high side of the variance sometimes, and that's all that's going to count. So trying to eliminate the variance is wrong. Trying to eliminate the mistakes is absolutely right. Why are you making those mistakes? I don't know. Only the questions themselves can teach you why you're making those mistakes.
Yeah, I would. One way of thinking about this that I wanted to add, it's saying the same thing that you're saying, but for Daniel to think about this in terms of skills, like if you imagine necessary assumption questions, Daniel might be good at or totally understand 90% of the way necessary assumptions could be tested. And it just so happens that on one test that you take, that the 90% of your skill set was tested. The 10%, what you're not good at, just didn't make it onto that test. And so you do better than you normally do because you weren't thrown that stuff you don't know yet. But when you do get thrown it, you get it wrong. And then you got to dig into those questions. So yeah, I mean, it's saying the same thing that you're saying. You just got to, there are some tests that don't test your weaknesses as well as others.
Yeah, I don't want people to take away from that this is like a test of knowledge and that you have to develop encyclopedic knowledge of a knowledge base or something, because that's not really how this test works. It's more a test of skills, right? So you want to practice this test. But I totally get what you're saying, and the analogy is pretty close, right? That you can imagine a college chemistry exam or whatever, where it's a whole bunch of memorization. You can know a lot and get a shitty grade if they happen to test you on the things that you're soft on. Or you can know a little and happen to just have studied the exact perfect right stuff and score really well. So that's I agree that can kind of be what is happening sometimes here.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking about percentages, and I can see how that can be interpreted in terms of like knowledge. But what I was thinking about it is in terms of translating sentences, right? There are certain phrases and ways that things are constructed that you can translate correctly and efficiently, quickly. And there are some, things that have, when they're structured together in a certain way, you don't interpret them as well as you could have. And so it's that 10% of translate, because usually what this comes down to is, do you translate sentences exactly as they are stated?
Sometimes you can get away with little mistranslations. And that's a good day for me and I got my 180 today. But other days you might get punished for every single one of those mistranslations, and that's your 172. To me, you're the same Daniel on both the 172 and the 180. To me, you're just a 176 plus or minus 4. And that's a great place to be, Daniel. You should be signing up for the official test. You should take the official test as many times as necessary until you get one of those 177s or higher on your official record, and then you can declare victory. So great job, Daniel.
I mean, we've said this so many times on the podcast, and you just said this by saying that variance is your friend, but this is exactly why you have to take the test multiple times, because you're getting the school is judging you based on your highest score, even though that may not be rational.
Yeah. This next question is from Anonymous, and the subject is, what the hell is an assumption?
Hi, Ben and Nathan. Love you guys and all that you do. I'm coming to you with a question as to what the hell is an assumption? Not necessary assumption and not sufficient assumption in particular, but an assumption in general. What can be an assumption and what cannot? Please help. Thanks so much.
I don't want Anonymous to ask that question. I think Anonymous is asking the wrong question.
Okay, how come?
Because the LSAT specifically tests two different types of assumptions. The LSAT specifically tests necessary assumptions and sufficient assumptions. It's just two types of assumptions. I want you to learn both types of assumptions. I don't want you to tell me, I don't want to learn those two types. I want to just learn one type because that's not how the test works. I mean, that's like our whole point. I would never waste your time with shit that I didn't think was important for helping you get questions right on the law school admission test. So I'm not going to teach it the wrong way, which is to only learn about one, like what is an assumption. I don't know. You can look up the dictionary definition of assumption if you want, but on the LSAT, there's two different definitions of assumption. There's a sufficient assumption, which is the one that will, if added to the argument, prove the argument's conclusion. In other words, the one that will make the argument win. And there's a necessary assumption, which is a totally different thing, which is the one that the author has to agree with. And if you don't learn it that way, then you're always going to miss questions. You're never going to really understand assumption questions on the LSAT if you insist on learning one definition of assumption instead of learning the actual two different definitions of assumption that are tested on this exam. So that's why we teach it the way we teach it.
Okay. I mean, an assumption in my mind is just an unstated premise. So if people can understand that it's a piece of evidence that was left out, then maybe that can also then help them get to understand a necessary assumption and a sufficient assumption. I also don't think those are the only assumptions that people have to worry about on the test.
I just have seen too many times where people say, I couldn't pick that answer because it's a necessary assumption question. I couldn't pick that answer because it felt like they said it. You said it was an unstated premise. People get caught up on unstated premise, but that's never, ever part of my analysis. I never think about that when I'm answering an actual assumption question on the LSAT. I never think about, did you state this explicitly or did you not state it explicitly? I think about, okay, it's a sufficient assumption question, which means we need to build a bridge between the evidence that we have and the conclusion we want. What is the thing that if we add it to this argument, this incomplete argument, if we add it to that argument, it's going to make the argument win? And on a necessary assumption question, it's really just flip the switch into must be true mode. Which one does the author have to agree with? And if it feels like they stated it, that's the answer. So that's why I don't like telling people it's an assumption is an unstated premise. Well, okay, but I think that's going to hurt people on necessary assumption questions.
Well, okay. So the other idea I wanted to express is that assumptions don't just come up in those two question types. They come up all over the place. They also come up in answer choices, right? People make assumptions to make an answer choice work. And so when Anonymous says what can be an assumption and what cannot, I almost wonder if they're sensing this situation in which you're looking at an answer choice and yeah, you are making an assumption to make it work, but it's relatively reasonable, or at least it's more reasonable than the assumptions that are being made for other answer choices.
Yeah, and in that light, if we're not specifically talking about these two question types, if we're just talking about the overall idea of I mean, it's in the instructions, right? In the instructions for logical reasoning, you're supposed to pick the answer that most accurately answers the question, blah, 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 without making unwarranted assumptions. So an unwarranted assumption is like some big assumption that someone is obviously making that is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like, well, I have to drive from San Francisco to Los Angeles in the next hour, but my car is really fast. So I should make it no problem. Whoa. Well, you're making the assumption that your car can get you from San Francisco to Los Angeles in an hour.
Mm-hmm.
It can't. It's at least a 5-hour drive. You're not doing that. And so that would be an example, I guess, of where, like, if someone had made that argument, or if you were invited to, go down that path on an answer choice or something, you would think about, oh, well, wait a second, boy, that's a pretty big leap there. Can you think of other examples of unwarranted assumptions?
Yeah, I mean, the most frequent times that it happens, it seems like, well, aside from bad arguments, is also just wrong answer choices, right? That require people to make often 2 assumptions, sometimes 3 assumptions. And those assumptions are questionable in the sense that if you raise them in front of a group of scientists, they might agree that it's certainly plausible, but not necessarily true. Whereas things that just wouldn't be debated by any academic community, even if it's not 100% guaranteed to be true, is probably reasonable for the sake of the
A
LSAT.
reasonable assumption. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess assumptions come in a wide spectrum of reasonableness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there are assumptions that you would say are almost certain to be true.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's colder in the winter than it is in the summer, or it gets dark at night when the sun goes down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or at least darker. Yeah.
Right. The sun will come up tomorrow morning, or I don't know. Yeah. Like next Sunday will arrive.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't know. You don't know that Sunday's going to ever get here, Ben.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe the sun will blow up and we'll all be
Right.
vaporized.
But,
yeah.
Right. But it's like, okay, but that's just not that. It's not a very, that's an almost certainty that the sun is going to rise and we're going to have the days we're going to keep coming. Right. Then there are like, okay, like probably
Yep.
assumptions. I don't know. An example of that would be like, it's the middle of the week and middle of the day and I am hungry and I'm going to go to the McDonald's down the road. Like it's probably open. I don't know. I mean, there's no reason to suspect that it's not open. Then again, it certainly doesn't have to be open because it could have been closed. There could be a fire alarm. There could be, I don't know, sewer line failure. There's 1,000 reasons why it could be closed too.
Totally. I mean, this is why I think the test so strongly relies on picking the best answer, because at the end of the day, sometimes an assumption that works for one question doesn't work for another because it's not as robust as the other answer choices assumption.
Yeah, it is true that the correct answer doesn't have to be good. The correct answer just has to be the best one. But don't fall into the trap of thinking that it's really very close, because it's just not.
Yeah.
That if there is a second best answer at all, then there's a really, really good answer that is obviously better than that supposedly second. There'll be a second best answer where you'd have to make some assumptions in order to make it work. Then there'll be like a rock solid just winner. Yeah. Right. Or sometimes the correct answer is actually pretty shitty. Sometimes you have to make some pretty big assumptions in order for the correct answer to do anything at all. But in that case, there are going to be 4 garbage answers, just really 4 garbage. Demonstrably, totally can't pick them. No way you could possibly pick them. And you're left with what you're looking at it going, oh boy. All right. I mean, there's all kinds of problems with this answer, but the problems here are not as bad. The assumptions that I would have to make here are not as big as the assumptions that I would have to make elsewhere.
And that's almost always the case. When someone thinks an answer is so close, it's because they're making an assumption and they're unaware that they're making it.
I agree. Okay. I hope that was helpful. I'm sorry for being so combative at the top there. I mean, I really do though. I insist, if you want your best LSAT score, you do have to learn the difference between sufficient assumption and necessary assumption.
Yeah,
because
it's a slightly odd caveat, right? Like I don't want to learn about that.
They explicitly test it. And logical reasoning is now 2/3 of the test. And there's a lot of necessary assumption questions, and there's a pretty solid section of a pretty solid representation of sufficient assumption questions too. And there are ones that you will miss if you don't know the difference. There are ones that you will get right without knowing the difference. And that's great. Good for you. But there are other ones that you will miss if you don't learn the easy distinction between those two types. So please do learn those two types.
All right, this next one is from Anon. The subject is anonymous, obviously. Subject is, how useful is it to repeat logical reasoning / reading comp questions?
I was given advice from a different course that I should redo reading comprehension passages 3 days later until I can get my timing at approximately 8 minutes. Ben's already shaking his head dismissively.
Yeah, it's such a weird suggestion, in part because you're going to remember what you just read 3 days ago. And then getting your time down to 8 minutes in reading comprehension on a passage you've already read doesn't tell you anything. It's just like, is that even the right time for that passage? And does that mean that like 8 minutes on a passage you've read before? I don't know.
If you do the simple math, right? 4 passages, 35 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
You get 8 minutes and 45 seconds per passage.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's cold without ever having read it before. And this idea that 3 days later, you're going to now redo it and try to do it in 8 minutes. And what happens if you don't? Then you redo it again and try to do it in 8 minutes.
Yeah.
But how do you not remember what the passage was about? I mean, I have a shitty memory, but I can remember the passage that I read yesterday. I mean,
yeah. Well, especially if you grappled with the ideas as you read and articulated the main point in your own words, you're searing little clues into your memory that will definitely surface. Yeah.
Yeah. People don't understand what reading comprehension is. This is just not the type of shitty reading you did in college. What many of you did very shitty reading in college. You had outrageously long
assignments,
reading assignments that no one could actually do. You did not practice close reading and actually understanding what it said. Instead, you were skimming the surface, just looking to write some bullshit paper at the end of the semester. You didn't really understand what you were reading. Sorry, not in law, not in lawyer terms. You did not understand what you were reading. And this is different. This passage is only 14 sentences, 15 sentences.
Yep.
And there's an agenda there. They're trying to do something. They're telling you about a new development that they think is really interesting and how we discovered that development. Or they're telling you about a problem and how that problem might be solved. Or they're telling you about a debate between one camp and another camp. And they're telling you the pros and cons of those two. Maybe they're offering you a third compromise solution. They're doing something. They have a point. They have a thesis. And I don't know what your reading comprehension teacher is trying to teach you with this idea that, oh no, just reread it. Just do it again 3 days later and see if you get faster. What? You've already read it. How's that teaching you how to do reading comprehension?
Yeah.
Anyway, the email continues. It says, the idea being that I will get used to where the important information in the passage is.
That changes every passage, by the way.
Yeah, sometimes the first sentence is the thesis sentence of the passage. Other times, it's the last sentence. Other times, I remember distinctly that in my class last week, it was the first sentence of, no, I think it was the last sentence of the second paragraph. It was just like, boom, there it is.
Yeah.
It can come anytime during the passage, and they also don't have to necessarily state their thesis explicitly. It could just kind of emerge from all of the things that they're saying.
Also, there's this underlying assumption here, right? When it says the idea being that I will get used to where the important information is. When you only have 15 sentences, I feel like all of the sentences are important. People really get obsessed with this. Like, oh, I wanted to highlight this and I wanted to, like, that seemed like a really important detail. All of them are important because the LSAT can test you on any single one of them. It's not going to be like, oh, well, we decided not to test you on that because it doesn't seem that important. There's just not that much information in the passage.
There's 5 to 8 questions about these 14 sentences.
That's 2 sentences per question.
Which means it's all important. You can't just you can't just cherry pick. Oh, that can't be that. No, they're not going to ask me about that. You don't know that. You have no idea what they're going to ask you about and not ask you about. Not only that, but understanding all 14 of the sentences helps you get past the wrong answers more quickly, because they will throw in some phrases from, oh, you read that.
That's how they write the wrong answers.
You read it, but they're going to misdescribe what it actually said. And if you were like skimming the passage, you might just catch, oh yeah, that phrase. Yeah. Okay. I like that because it said that, and I'm getting better at going back and finding where it is. Like, okay, to continue the email. I've been doing this for a few weeks and using the review section on the Demon, but I'm not sure it's actually helping. I definitely am able to locate the support for my answers quicker and choose the right answers faster. But isn't that because I just did the passage and reviewed it extensively? Which, yes.
Yeah.
Also, the fact that you're able to just go like match a phrase to get the textual support, you have to understand the context around the phrase in order to be right in that. So I do think that this is just memory. Like all you're doing is memorizing the passages that you've already done. Like flashcards.
Yeah. I do think there is a follow-up question to this, and that is sometimes people do all of the tests that are available, and then they're like, hey, can I even repeat stuff? And my answer to that is always, okay, well, when you repeat the content, are you getting every single question right? And usually the answer is no, which means there's some value there because, okay, you're doing something you did presumably a long time ago, and you're still getting questions wrong. So what can you learn from those mistakes? And I do find that when I do reading comp passages in class, clearly I've done it before because there's a video of me from 2017 talking about it, but I don't remember shit, and I'm just like, okay. So I think at some point you do forget these things, but 3 days later, as a part of a strategy, just seems like a poor use of time. You could be doing a whole new RC passage and really focusing on understanding it the first time instead of learning how to understand something after reading and reviewing it.
Yeah, you need to practice the skill of reading comprehension.
Yep.
You're practicing the skill of memorizing a reading comprehension passage and the answers to the questions.
Not that you're trying to do that, but that's essentially what's happening.
That's what your dumb LSAT tutor told you to do, and that's just sorry, but that I don't know what skill you're supposed to be practicing there, but that's not it. We have, how many passages do we have, Ben? Hundreds of passages.
Hundreds. Yeah.
Okay. We have, however many sections, 80 sections of reading comprehension. You're not going to remember those 300 something passages if you space them out. 3 days later, yeah, but 3 months later, you're not going to remember. So I would always be covering, thoroughly review your mistakes for sure. Why'd you make that mistake? Why'd you pick that wrong answer? Why didn't you pick that right answer? How could you have gotten this one right? But no point redoing it 3 days later. Learn from your mistakes and move on to a new passage, because you got hundreds of them to work on. Next one's from Anonymous. Subject is, how do I make improvements in reading comprehension without focusing on time?
Hey, Demon Team. I've been working on my RC, making sure I methodically read the passages sentence by sentence and understand the structure, main point, and any important takeaways. I'm averaging around 10 to 14 minutes per passage while drilling and rarely making any mistakes. When I am doing time sections, I hide the clock and usually finish all 3 of the first passages, almost always getting every question right, but time usually runs out right as I'm starting to read the last passage. I never have time to fully read it through, forget answering any questions. I'm plateauing around here and I'm unable to see progress in getting to answer any questions on the last passage. What do you recommend I do? Is it time to actually think about the time I'm spending on each passage?
No, but close. You need to think about how much time you're spending on the wrong answer choices. And I don't mean that you need to actually watch the clock. I'm so glad that you're turning the clock off. I think that that's a critical step in the right direction. And you're already doing great, by the way. 3 perfect passages is strong. I mean, you're scoring 20 something points on reading comprehension, which is fantastic. The way that you're going to get to that 4th passage, and not necessarily all of the questions, especially not right away, but the way that you're going to get to to some of the questions on the 4th passage is to more confidently dismiss wrong answers on the first 3 passages. How do we get there?
By practicing what Anonymous is practicing, sentence by sentence, understand the passage, make it easier to
Solve the
predict.
question,
Yeah.
make sure you're getting it right. But as you accumulate these long strings of correct answers, Anonymous, you should be getting more and more confident that you know what right answers look like, and you also know what wrong answers look like. And I'm sure you're not taking too much time reading the passage. I'm sure you are taking too much time to answer the questions because you're triple checking rather than just, hey, I made a prediction here. These 4 answers look like complete trash. This answer is what I predicted. You don't need to go back and find the textual support in that instance. Just pick it and move on. You know, you might miss it 1 out of 20 times. That's okay, actually, to miss it 1 out of 20 times. If you make 1 mistake in the entire section, great. You know, and it helps you to answer 3 or 4 more questions in the 4th passage. That's a win. Now, as soon as you start missing 1 question per passage, then now it's counterproductive and you need to slow down again. But for now, if you really are usually getting almost always getting every question right, then you have my blessing to answer the questions themselves more quickly. You should be dismissing some of the wrong answers after just a few words. You should be predicting the answer to half the questions at least.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that because that's not something that Anonymous mentioned, right? So maybe Anonymous is doing that, but people do at some point get the message, hey, I got to make a loose prediction after I read the question. And then the question becomes, hey, how do I make better predictions? And that comes back to, okay, well, make sure you're reading the passage carefully and understand it. So it sounds like you're doing that part, which means I think your predictions are likely to be good. But if you're not practicing them, then maybe you're not getting as good at them as you could.
Make predictions, trust those predictions. Don't go back to the passage on every single question. Go back when necessary, but don't go back when it's not necessary. And there are times, Ben, I think you would probably confirm this, but maybe not. So I'll ask you. But would you, okay, suppose you didn't like 4 answers. One of them you liked, but you're not sure about.
Pick it. I didn't like the other 4.
Right. And I think some students might take our accuracy first to be like accuracy at all costs.
Yeah, and it's like disprove each wrong answer, prove the correct answer. Yeah.
If there's 4 answers that smell bad to you and 1 answer that looks like, yeah, I think I remember them, just saying, I think I remember them saying that is good enough if you also hate the other 4 answers.
Mm-hmm.
There's no need to prove that to yourself. And it's impossible frequently to disprove the wrong answers.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Reread the whole passage again to make sure they didn't say what A says? Reread the whole passage again to make sure that it doesn't say what B says? No, don't do it that way. A, I don't think so. B, nah. C, no. D, oh yeah, I think they said that. E, no, I don't. Got to be D. I mean, it's just D. It has to be D. So you should pick it and move on, and that's how you're going to go faster.
Great. All right,
you put this next one on the agenda, huh?
I did, yeah. So my dad sent me this article, and then I turned around and sent it to you. It suffers immensely from a clickbait title, but when I was reading through the passage or the article, I was saying to myself, okay, well, that's true, and this is true. So and it sounds like something that is true for a lot of our listeners who listen to this podcast. So I wanted to share this and just see what you have to say on the show about it. I cut out, I thought, the unimportant parts. You want to give it a read?
Yeah, I made the mistake of clicking on the link to upworthy.com, and I don't have like ad blockers installed. Get ad blockers installed on your computer before you click the link to Upworthy, because it has
Yeah.
some very obnoxious ads.
Yeah, this is not a great site to get information from.
Should I read you want me to read the passage?
Yeah, just the clips that I cut out.
Sure. The effortless tricks neuroscientists say will help you pick up any new skill a lot faster. Yeah, so there's the clickbait headline.
Yep.
Subhead, it's a passive hack that works wonders. Okay, what is it? I can't wait.
They haven't told us anything.
No. Todd Perry with 1D says, learning a new skill, such as playing an instrument, gardening, or picking up a new language, takes a lot of time and practice. To improve through practice, you have to perform the task repeatedly while also receiving feedback so you know whether you're doing it correctly or not. However, a new study by researchers at the Institute of Neuroscience at the University of Oregon shows that you can speed up the processes by adding a third element to practice and feedback, which is passive exposure. So passive exposure is the one effortless trick. That is effortless, actually. What is passive exposure, you might ask? Active learning of a task requires both expending effort to perform the task and having access to feedback about task performance, the study authors explained. Passive exposure to sensory stimuli, on the other hand, is relatively effortless and does not require feedback about performance. So, if you're learning to play the blues on guitar, listen to plenty of Howlin' Wolf or Robert Johnson throughout the day. If you're learning to cook, keep the Food Network on TV all day to absorb some great culinary advice. Learning to garden? Take the time to notice the flora and fauna in your neighborhood or make frequent trips to your local botanical garden. The scientists add that auditory learning is especially helpful, so listen to plenty of audiobooks or podcasts on the subject you're learning about. Ben, I noticed that you added emphasis to podcasts.
Yeah, well, so the idea about practice and feedback is what the Demon is based on, right? That's why we started it, so that people could do a question and get immediate feedback on it. So that's practice and feedback. And we've heard over the years people who say, hey, all I did was listen to the podcast and I made a lot of progress. And I always, think, okay, great. I mean, they must have picked up some tips. They must have picked up some ideas.
Well, and they were doing practice tests, right?
Yes, they were.
They listened to the Thinking LSAT podcast, 10 years worth of the Thinking LSAT podcast. And they also did their own practice tests and presumably reviewing those practice tests. So they are doing the practice and getting the feedback. The test at least will tell you whether you got it right or wrong, which is feedback, right?
Yep.
And if you have good explanations like we offer in the Demon, then you could read the explanations, you could watch the video explanations, you could use the ask button to talk to our team of tutors for more clarification. And that's all the feedback you possibly could need to get better. I mean, we also have one-on-one tutoring if you want that kind of direct feedback one-on-one. You're saying that the podcast, just passively listening to the podcast while you're at the gym, you're in the car, you're commuting to work or whatever, you're saying that that is giving this reinforcement.
Yeah, it might have more value than I've thought it had in the past, right? Maybe there is more something going on. And I do feel like this has happened with me too, when I'm trying to learn something new and there's an element of practice and then I'm listening about it. And then when I get back to practice, I maybe apply one or two ideas that I heard, or it motivates me to do it. There's a lot more there than I think I realized. That's all, despite the clickbaitedness of this article.
What new skills have you been working on?
Recently coding.
Oh, okay.
And so there are, believe it or not, there are audiobooks about it, which is funny because you obviously have to do it too to
even
really
have any
learn
idea what they're
right?
saying. Yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, the vocabulary and whatnot is going on in the background, and it makes it like you jump in and there's a little bit more that you have learned than if you just started from nothing.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, I did think as well. When you sent this to me over the weekend or whatever, I was reminded about all the emails we've gotten from listeners who have said, "I just listened to your podcast for a year or whatever, and
Yeah.
magically I never did any LSAT prep at all. I just had a book of tests and I had your podcast and I killed it." And it's
Hmm.
like, oh, okay, yeah, well, you're doing the practice, you're getting the feedback from the test itself, and then you're listening to us for passive. I mean, how many times have we explained the difference between sufficient assumption and necessary assumption and what you should do to answer those two very different question types?
Yeah.
It seems like that comes up every single show. So I guess people are getting just passive LSAT instruction here on the Thinking LSAT podcast.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for indulging me on that one. This next email is from Olivia. The subject is actually studying. Hey, Ben and Nathan, I'm registered for the August LSAT and I'm not doing well. I'm scoring in the 150s on my practice test and getting like 60% on my timed practice sets. Okay. I did all the things I was supposed to, register for the demon, heart emoji, waited until the deadline to register, etc. But one thing I'm not doing is studying. I know it explains why I'm not doing well, exclamation point. I know I'm capable of doing well and I really want to, but I'm struggling with actually sitting down and getting an hour of quality study time. If you have any tips on motivating or how I can trick myself into hunkering down, it would be greatly appreciated.
You didn't do all the things you were supposed to do. You did one of the things you were supposed to do. I mean, you registered for the demon, which great. We love to have you, but then it sounds like you didn't use it. We want you to register for the demon and use the demon daily. 1 hour of quality study time per day is basically the minimum price of admission to this party. Maybe you don't want to go to law school that much. That's fine. I'm not going to try to talk you into law school. Neither is Ben. We will both actively try to talk you out of law school. So why do you want to go to law school? What's the point of all this? You're not going to get the score you want on the August LSAT, so you should just withdraw. You're not ready. You know you're not ready. Your practice test scores clearly indicate that you're not ready. You should not have registered for it at the deadline. Our advice is not wait for the deadline, then register. Our advice is wait for the deadline, look at your practice test scores. If you're happy with your practice test scores, then register. That's our actual advice. So you missed part of that, and maybe it's our fault for not communicating it clearly enough. Although I do feel like we say it pretty often and pretty firmly that your practice tests aren't going to lie. Pay attention to your practice test scores. Don't register until you are happy with your practice test scores. Also, we say pretty firmly that you need to do 1 hour a day. Minimum. High quality, 1 hour a day. Minimum. To be successful. And many, many of your competitors do far more than that. My hypothesis at this point is that your competitors want this more than you do. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I would not encourage you to try to change that. If you don't want this, then don't do it. There are a million other things you could do out there. Wide world of open, just full of possibilities for a young person to do whatever the hell you want. And it sounds like right now, law school ain't it. If you can't find an hour a day to study for the LSAT, how the hell are you going to find an hour a day, more like 4 or 6 hours a day or more to study the far more boring stuff that you'll be studying in law school?
So I don't disagree that that could be Olivia's problem, but I am thinking of this book I read where the author was talking about how in high school he had C's and D's and really struggled to study. And everybody told him, hey, why don't you want to do better? And his point in the book was he really, really wanted to, but he really struggled to do so. And then he started breaking down his tasks to an extreme level. So he would start his homework and read for 5 minutes, and then he would go do something else. and then he would read another 5 minutes. So it wasn't like he was reading 5 minutes a day. He was actually putting in quite a few minutes of study every day. But for him, for whatever reason, the idea of focusing longer than that was very challenging to him. And so he just broke it way down. And I think over time, I can't remember the details now. I think he got to a point where he was doing longer sets of study time, but that was enough to get him started. And then he would reset and then he would do it again. And he just kept going at it. And he eventually got A's. And he was saying it was really tough because his parents and these other people are like, hey, you just don't want, why don't you want to work harder? And he had this like disconnect, right? I do want to work harder. For this process isn't working for me. So it's possible, Olivia, that you don't want this, even though you superficially think you do. And that's totally fine. As you were saying, Nate, like don't pursue this path. But if you really do want it, maybe you got to try something else. Do one LR question, take a break, do another one, and set a different, I don't know, study habit for yourself until you get into this. But you're going to have to figure it out because law school is not any easier. It's exponentially harder.
No, law school is going to be, the most civilized way to do it is to make it like a 9-to-5 job. And if you do make it a 9-to-5 job, I think you can actually avoid ever studying on nights or weekends. I've seen it done. I know it can be done. I know you can get A's in your 1L year. If you make it a 9-to-5 job, you can have your books on campus, never take them home, never do any work at home. I just know that it is possible to do that. But that's a 9-to-5. That's 40 hours a week. And by the way, it doesn't even take all 40 of those hours. I've seen it done with frequently it's going to be 9 to 1. I'm done. I'm ahead on my readings. Class was slow today. I'm already way into next week. I don't want to get too far ahead. Take the afternoon off. That's fine. But you're in the office at 9 a.m. every day. Even if you don't have class until 1 p.m., you're going to be at school working at 9 a.m.
Yep.
That's how you can make law school civilized and keep it on a Monday through Friday 9-to-5 schedule.
Totally.
If you're struggling to find 1 hour a day to study for the LSAT, then there might be just a very rude awakening coming for you starting law school and realizing that you do have to take it. You're going to have to take studies seriously. Nobody's going to force you to do your readings. Nobody's going to make you sit down and do the work. So you are going to have to sit down and do the work. I guess, Ben, what you were talking about is like the gym door thing, or I've heard people say, okay, you're really having a hard time getting a fitness routine going. Tell you what, all you got to do is put on your tennis shoes. Put on your running shoes. If you put on your running shoes, then that's a win for today. So go put on your running shoes, see how you feel.
Yeah.
And if you did put them on and you're like, oh, okay, I think I feel like I might want to actually, okay, just go walk, walk down the block. Just do something short. And maybe you can build up from there. So maybe, Olivia, you could trick yourself into it by doing what Ben's talking about, one question. Just start drilling. Hit drill, do one question.
Like don't make it bigger than it needs to be. And then
maybe do another one.
Yeah.
I myself, I read this. I'm not sure, Ben, if I've talked to you about this on the show before, but I read a long time ago, because I'm a procrastinator, or I consider myself to be a procrastinator. But I read a long time ago that there's 2 main types of procrastination. And they have to do with misidentifying how long something is going to take.
Sure. Okay.
There's a kind of procrastination where you think it's not going to take as long as it actually takes.
So you put it off?
So you put it off, and then once you get started, you're like, oh shit.
Oh shit.
That doesn't happen to me, actually.
Okay.
That is not my type of procrastination. My type of procrastination is the exact opposite. And there's echoes in what Olivia is saying to what happens in my own brain, which is I make it out to be a huge deal. Like it feels like it's going to be forever. It just feels like it's going to be so painful. And frequently when I get started on the task, I realize that I knock it out in 3 minutes and it was nothing. Or I start working on it and I actually enjoy it. So it's not an ordeal no matter how long it takes.
Yeah.
But it's the fear of the pain that keeps me
Hmm.
from doing it. And I wonder if that's what it is for Olivia. Like that 1 hour just sounds so impossible for her.
Yeah.
Well, then, okay, do 15 minutes, do 5 minutes. But, eventually you're going to have to get up to an hour or two probably a day, at least 1 hour, high quality hour per day if you want to make progress. And, unsubscribe Olivia from the demon if you're not going to use it. Don't pay us for nothing.
Hmm.
Unsubscribe if you're not using it. But if you're subscribed and you're paying us, then take advantage. There's a lot there and you could get a lot of help and, you know, do one question. And if you don't understand it, watch the videos and, and if you don't understand it, use the ask button, write a thoughtful question, and then maybe take a break for the day. Wait for the ask button team to get back to you or something.
I wonder about live too, because if Olivia is not in live, you sign up for a class. We do questions. Some, classes, yours don't, but some classes do questions in class. If that's enough motivation to do them.
Even in my classes,
Yeah.
I take long enough to talk about. I mean, we're going to do like 6 logical reasoning questions in an hour.
Yeah.
That's enough time that even if you hadn't prepped the question ahead of time,
Hmm.
we're going to say, I mean, I'm going to read the entire argument to you.
Yeah.
I'm going to read every answer choice to you. I'm going to read the question. I'm going to read every answer choice to you. I'm probably going to reread the argument several times, different pieces and parts of it, and
Yeah.
the correct answer. And any wrong answer that you might be attracted to, I'm happy to talk about that 10 different ways so that I can debunk that wrong answer. So even if I don't give you time to work on the question, I think you could still just show up. And it kind of ties into the passive reinforcement thing that we were talking about earlier too, right?
Mm.
I frequently tell people not to go to live classes as a substitute for doing your own studying.
Yes. 100%.
But for somebody like Olivia, who's just not even using the access, she's not doing her drilling, she's not doing her timed sections,
Yeah.
she's not doing her 1 hour a day. Well, can you sign up for live and find 1 hour a day where you can commit to it? Sign
Yep.
up for the class, get some reminders, come say hi to me, come say hi to Ben, do the work. We'll try to keep it entertaining if we can. You know,
Yeah.
it's not as good as doing your own drilling or timed sections or reviewing your own mistakes, but it might be a lot more tolerable for you. So maybe, yeah, that's a good point, Ben.
Great. Uh, we have another one here from Anonymous. The subject is LR predictions and intuition.
Hi, guys. I adopted your practice of making predictions before jumping into the answer choices in LR. Game changer. However, there are two methods that I've carried out. One, being hasty and choosing exactly what I was looking for without giving much thought to other answers. Or two, carefully reading all the choices before picking. Well,
It
there's a
almost sounds
third
like,
way.
yeah, there's a
There's
middle
a
ground here.
there is a middle ground. And the middle ground, in short, is have a great prediction, but expect A to be wrong because it is 80% of the time. Read A, expecting it not to be what you were looking for. Dismiss it pretty quickly in most cases. Read all of it if you have to read all of it, if it looks like it might actually be sensible. But if it's nonsense, you gotta get rid of it. You gotta get to B. Do that same analysis of B, C, D, and E, but one of those five is going to be the answer. And you should recognize it most of the time. You should recognize it on your way through. So even though you're like, I think this is probably not going to be the answer when I'm reading it, by default, I expect answer choices to be wrong. But I also know that 1 out of 5 of them is going to turn out to be right. And when I recognize, oh, that actually, there's something there. Okay, so that's now probably my answer. Then I just dismiss D, dismiss E. So neither am I just picking my, blind, like not even reading the other four answers
Hmm.
and picking my prediction, which question whether that's actually even possible.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it that way, but I'm also not carefully reading all 5 before picking, because I'm only ever thinking about 2 answers maximum at once. This is a critical point that many students miss, Ben. I'm sure you've seen this before. Students will think A is a contender, they'll think B is a contender, and they'll move on to C.
Yeah. No. You got to stop right there. You can't have two choices. One is better than the other. Choose now. Which one is better?
There can be only one.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Like, those answers have to fight to the death before reading new answers.
Yeah, you can't get to 3 possible choices when you're doing it right. You can't
Right.
get there.
Right. There are never, there at most, my puny brain is holding 0, right? Frequently, my puny brain is holding 0 answers
Yeah.
because
We
I
don't like
read
any
A
of
and
them.
hated it,
Yeah.
or 1 answer because I found an answer that I think, okay, yeah, there's something there. Probably going to be it's exactly what I predicted, or it's not exactly what I predicted, but it does seem like it validly answers the question. That's probably the answer. But the second I read another answer and go, oh, that's also good. It's just a tragedy if you go on to read another answer, because now you're like trying to hold 3 answers in your head.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. We don't talk about this a lot on the podcast, but we do talk a lot about reading sentences and making sense of them. And if they don't make sense, to stop immediately and go back. This is the same concept. You're just kicking the can down the road. You're like, oh, okay, oh, it didn't make sense what I just read before, so I'm going to keep reading to the rest of the passage. It's procrastination.
It's
right?
not
Because
working out between the two of us. Maybe if we add a third party to the mix,
Yeah.
that'll solve everything. You
Yeah.
know? Like, it's sorry, I don't want to make like too bad of metaphors about that, but yeah, no. If you don't have it worked out between you and your spouse, having a kid is not gonna make it better. Right? Sort it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that is a critical point that you just, and because it does seem like what Anonymous is suggesting here is that Anonymous might be holding as many as 5 answers in their head at once. If you're going to carefully read all the choices before picking.
Yeah.
I don't think so. You have to at
maybe
least
Anonymous
eliminate
is,
answers along the way.
Yeah. Maybe they're disproving answers, which would be better than keeping 5. But even then, yeah.
Okay, so Anonymous continues and says, the first way, that is being hasty and choosing exactly what I was looking for without giving much thought to other answers. The first way is elite in the sense that I demolish logical reasoning, especially in many necessary assumption questions where there is a clear gap to be bridged.
I almost feel like you're talking about sufficient assumption questions there, but okay.
And this method is not only accurate in the grand majority of times, it is also accompanied by speed. I feel unstoppable with this method. But it backfires, of course, especially with level 5 questions, where a clear tactic they employ is making the choices appealing by going in the direction you were headed, but being ultimately misleading. Well, but dude, you do have to read every word of the answer that you're going to pick.
Yeah, and this is actually kind of the middle ground I was thinking of initially, because he talks about being hasty and then carefully reading all 5 answer choices. Wait. Okay, can we be hasty in a sense with the wrong answers that we don't like, but not hasty with the one that we actually choose? Because that's what it sounds like is happening here, right? If it's going in the direction you like and then you pick it, well, then you're also being hasty with the correct answer, which is not good.
Yeah, you need to understand every word. You have to vouch for every word in the right answer.
In the answer you choose. Yep. If you're going to choose that answer, yep, you have to say, I've seen every word here and it's all good.
Feel free to dismiss other answers without reading every word. In fact, you should, and that's the advice that I am explicitly giving to Anonymous above, who wants to go faster on reading comp without focusing on time. The way you do that is by just eliminating wrong answers after a few words. But the right answer, the one that you're going to pick, just because it kind of sounds like starts off perfect. Yeah. Okay. Let's see how it finishes, because it can finish literally just one word. The last word of the answer choice might make it conclusively 100% wrong. I don't care how good the first 99% of it was. 1% of it means out. 1% bad means out. So you do have to read every word.
Mhm.
Okay, so anyway, Anonymous continues with, the second method allows me not to fall for those traps, but a con is that I lose focus on my predictions and get tripped up in semantics, which can lead to wasted time or even wrong answers. That's if you
Well,
read all the answers before picking.
that's true, because a lot of wrong answers don't make any sense. And so if you're trying to make it make sense and then dismiss it, that can take forever.
Yeah. I'm glad you recognize, Anonymous, that making predictions is a game changer. That is absolutely right. The LSAT is easy if you learn to attack the arguments properly. By the way, go to Kevin's free guilty or not guilty class that's coming up. Go to lsatdemon.com/free if you would like to register for that class on Tuesday, August 13. It's about how to attack logical reasoning arguments. So, Anonymous, I'm glad that you've picked that up, how important that is. But I think you're making some excuses for your missed questions here, because the right answer has to actually answer the question that's being asked, not just, oh, I liked some phrases in it. And when you say, I lose focus on my predictions and get tripped up in semantics by the wrong answers, I think you're losing focus there. You're not, it has to make sense. It has to make sense. You don't get caught, you don't get tripped up in semantics if you're expecting the test to make sense. There is an answer that answers the question properly based on the facts that were given and the question that was asked and the words in that answer choice. There's one that clicks. There's one that makes sense. So this idea that you can just, oh, if I read all 5 answers, then I might get tripped up in the semantics. Well, AKA you're picking answers you just don't understand. And that's why you're missing those questions. It's not because you read all 5 answers. You should read all 5 answers. But you should make good predictions. You should eliminate wrong answers quickly and then just never look at them again. If answers don't make sense, they're probably not the answer. But you should feel good about and really understand the correct answer that you're picking.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's getting tripped up in semantics because he's trying to make sense of a nonsensical answer.
Right. And so you got to flip your mindset there, which is I'm expecting answers to be wrong when I read them.
Mhm.
I know that
Mhm.
every answer has an 80% chance of being wrong.
Yeah.
I
And
know
even
that
greater once you find one you like, right?
right. Yeah. Even then you have to kind of adjust it, it's like a Bayesian sort of a thing where it's like, well, look, I made a perfect prediction. A didn't seem right. B didn't seem right. C seems like I've read every word of it. It seems like it matches my prediction perfectly.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, then now it's like a 95% chance that D's wrong and E's wrong. But you still have to check it off. You still have to look at it
Sure.
and make sure, okay, I can comfortably dismiss that one and do it one at a time. Don't like try to read D and E and then eliminate both of those.
Mhm.
Read D, it's either the answer or not. No? Okay, get rid of it. Now read E, it's the answer or not. No? Okay, get rid of it.
All right, let's go to word of the week. This one is from Eric. He sends in an ask button question about a particular usage of a common word. For context, it was a reading comp passage that discusses the work of a poet. And the final question is an organization question. That's a question that's asking how the passage is organized. And part of the correct answer reads, differing opinions about the success of his poetry are presented. Again, that's differing opinions about the success of his poetry are presented.
We're
All
supposed to
right.
be saying what success means here.
Yeah. And so the student didn't like this answer.
Well, I mean, without any context, without more context than that,
Yep.
if I were to say yes, there were differing opinions about the success of his poetry presented,
Mm-hmm.
I would need two different people,
Yep.
two different
At
critics,
least.
probably,
Yep.
Or more, but
Or more.
at least
Yep.
two
Yep.
differing, or I suppose it could be one person who expressed two different opinions.
Sure. So two opinions were stated, whether they were shared by one individual or multiple. Yep.
Okay. What does success of poetry mean? I could interpret that very broadly.
Oh, that really depends on how you define success, right? Oh, poetry is successful if it follows the form defined by whatever, your group.
The financial success of the poetry,
Yep.
then, and there were two different opinions, then fine. Financial success is good enough. Are they
Yep.
talking about artistic success? Are they talking about emotional success? Are they talking about, like
Personal
in a haiku,
triumph.
like in a haiku or whatever, simply following the form might be defined as success.
Yeah. There's also popular success,
Yeah, did it achieve? So
notoriety.
I'm hoping that, I hope I'm right here. I just think that success could mean almost anything.
Yep.
Are they talking about the merits and demerits of his poetry? And are
Yep.
there two different opinions? If one says it's good and one says it's bad, then I think that they have offered different opinions about the success of the poetry.
Yep.
Okay. The student objects, I don't think that the success of this poet is debated. It states in the first few lines that he is one of the foremost poets of the Harlem Renaissance. What seems to be debated is the quality of work, which absolutely could be what we're talking about when we're talking about the success of poetry. Again, if one person says it's good and the other person says it's bad, quality, then they have absolutely they have offered different opinions about the success of the poetry. Success can easily mean that in this context. Eric, I guess, responded to the ask ticket and said, totally reasonable objection, but successful doesn't mean popular here. Academics and art critics will use the word successful as a pretentious way to comment on the quality of a work. That artistic success is independent of how popular the art is. Yeah. And if they were talking about popularity, then that answer is right. But they could also, again, be talking about financial success, critical success, technical success, any kind of success.
Great. Thanks for sharing, Eric. Be LSAT famous. Please ask questions or share news with us on our website, thinkinglsat.com, or on our socials, LSAT Demon or at LSAT Demon. If you have questions about the LSAT Demon, you can email help@lsatdemon.com. Also, check out our other podcast, LSAT Demon Daily. That was episode 465 of the Thinking LSAT podcast. Thanks all y'all for listening. Nice knowing you. Don't pay for law school.